Some of rock's biggest anthems weren't written by the artists who made them famous. In fact, several of these songs were flops, folk tunes, or forgotten B-sides before someone else got their hands on them and turned them into legends. Some of the original writers never made a dime off the fame their songs eventually earned. Others lived to see their quiet, overlooked track become a stadium-shaking anthem in someone else's hands. Today, we're counting down the 10 best-selling rock cover songs of all time, and the version at number 1 completely erased the original from most people's memory, even though the man who wrote it is still alive to talk about it. Some of these covers happened by accident, a band running out of material in the studio. Others happened because one artist simply refused to let a good song die in obscurity. Either way, by the end of this list, you may never listen to your favourite rock station the same way again. Let's begin. Number 10. Come On Feel the Noise by Quiet Riot.
Come on, feel the noise. Girls, rock your voice.
In February of 1973, British glam rockers Slade released this stomping, fist-pumping anthem and rode it straight to number 1 on the UK singles chart, the band's 4th chart topper. In Britain, Slade were massive. In America, they barely registered. A decade later, an American metal band with a chip on their shoulder and a rapidly closing record deal decided to take a swing at it. Quiet Riot were reluctant at first. Frontman Kevin Dubrow reportedly hated the idea of covering a glam rock single from a band most of their fans had never heard of, worried it would make them look like they'd run out of original ideas, and it took pressure from their label and producer to even get the band into the studio to track it. It didn't help that Slade's own material was virtually unknown in America at the time, meaning most of Quiet Riot's audience would have no idea the song wasn't even theirs to begin with. The band recorded it anyway, sped it up, thickened the guitars, and gave it a harder, more aggressive American metal sheen. The result reshaped rock history. Quiet Riot's 1983 version helped push their album Metal Health to number 1 on the Billboard 200, making it the first heavy metal album in history to top that chart. Slade's original never even cracked the American Hot 100. Quiet Riot's cover did, in a few months, what 6 years of Slade singles in the US couldn't manage, and the single itself cracked the top 5 on the Billboard Hot 100, an almost unthinkable result for a metal band on American pop radio at the time. Metal Health went on to sell more than 6 million copies in the United States, and years later, Slade's own noddy holder admitted he was genuinely stunned an American metal band had taken his song that far up the charts. A song built for British glam fans in flared trousers became the unlikely anthem of American arena metal, blasted out of car stereos an ocean away from the band that wrote it. Number 9. Black Betty by Ram Jam. Long before it was a rock song, it was a work chant. Black Betty traces back to African-American oral folk tradition, sung by labourers and prisoners generations before anyone thought to write it down. Blues legend Leadbelly was the first to capture it on record in the 1930s, performing it almost entirely a cappella, just voice and rhythm, with no clear single author to credit. In 1977, a New York studio band called Ram Jam, essentially assembled by producers specifically to record it after they'd been playing an early version of the arrangement live on the club circuit, took that stripped-down chant and slammed it into a wall of distorted guitars, thunderous drums, and a driving, unrelenting groove built to fill arenas rather than front porches. The transformation was so complete that most rock radio listeners had no idea the song predated the band by nearly a century. It cracked the top 20 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became a permanent fixture at sporting events, biker bars, and classic rock stations, the kind of song everyone recognizes within opening riff. There was controversy too. The song's raw, blunt lyrics drew criticism from some civil rights groups over its handling of the source material, controversy that only added to its notoriety. Ram Jam themselves faded quickly, never scoring another hit, and quietly dissolved a few years later. But the song lived on, completely independent of the band that made it famous, outlasting them by decades and becoming bigger than either of the acts who ever recorded it, going on to feature in countless films, commercials, and video games that reintroduced it to generation after generation of listeners who had no idea it started as a folk chant at all. A folk chant born in hardship became a stadium chant born in noise. Number 8. I Fought the Law, most famously by The Clash. The song was written by Sonny Curtis of the Crickets, Buddy Holly's old backing band, as a tribute penned in the wake of Holly's death in a devastating 1959 plane crash. The Crickets recorded the original version themselves in 1960, a fairly gentle rockabilly tune that came and went without much notice. Bobby Fuller IV picked it up in 1966, reworking the arrangement into something faster and more urgent, and turned it into a genuine hit, reaching the top 10 in the US. Tragically not long before Bobby Fuller himself was found dead under mysterious circumstances that were never fully explained, a shadow that has followed the song ever since. But it was the Clash's 1979 punk rock rendition that carried the song into rock immortality, stripping it down to raw, sneering defiance and blasting it through the UK punk scene like a manifesto. The Clash's version became so dominant in the cultural memory that many fans today assume Joe Strummer and Mick Jones wrote it from scratch. It's since been covered by dozens more artists across genres, from Green Day to the Dead Kennedys to Country Outlaws decades later, but the Clash's take remains the one radio stations reach for and the one that soundtracks every Prison Break movie trailer. Rolling Stone would later rank the song among the greatest cover versions ever recorded, crediting the Clash for finding the song's true, furious centre almost 20 years after it was first written. A song written to honour a fallen friend became, 2 decades later, a rallying cry for an entirely different generation of rebellion. Number 7, House of the Rising Sun by the Animals.
In New Orleans, they call.
This one is strange, because nobody actually knows who wrote it. House of the Rising Sun is a traditional folk song with roots stretching back generations in American oral tradition, passed down, reworked, and rewritten by countless singers long before anyone thought to attach a name to it. Bob Dylan had recorded his own bare-bones acoustic version of it back in 1962 on his self-titled debut album, itself borrowed from earlier folk singers who'd been passing the song hand-to-hand for years. But in 1964, a British band called The Animals took that ancient, weary melody, added a hypnotic, cascading electric organ line courtesy of keyboardist Alan Price, and recorded the entire arrangement in a single take, because they couldn't afford studio time for retakes. It shot to number 1 in both the United States and the United Kingdom, an almost unheard of feat for what was essentially a centuries-old folk ballad rebuilt as a rock record. Eric Burdon's haunting, weathered vocal delivery gave the song a menace the older folk versions never carried. Dylan himself later admitted he was startled and a little unsettled the first time he heard it on the radio, not realizing at first it was the same song. To this day, it's considered one of the first true folk rock hits, and the official songwriting credit still simply reads traditional, arranged by the Animals, because there was never anyone alive to give the royalties to. The single reportedly sold well over 1 million copies within weeks of release, an extraordinary number for 1964, and its 4.5-minute runtime, unusually long for a single at the time, is often credited with helping open the door for rock radio to accept longer, more ambitious songs. A song with no known author became one of rock's most recognizable openings. If you're discovering how many of your favorite rock anthems actually started out as someone else's forgotten song, that's exactly the kind of hidden history we dig up here every week, digging past the liner notes to find the real story behind the songs you thought you already knew. So hit like and subscribe to keep these stories coming. Let's continue. Number 6, Love Hurts, most famously by Nazareth. The Everly Brothers recorded the original version back in 1960, written by the songwriting team of Boudleaux and Felice Bryant, a tender, restrained ballad tucked away on an album track rather than released as a single, and it came and went with little fanfare, overshadowed by the duo's much bigger hits from the same era. Roy Orbison also cut his own version not long after, and it too failed to make much of a dent. But it was Scottish rock band Nazareth who found something violent and aching inside the gentle melody. In 1975, frontman Dan McCafferty's raspy, wounded vocal turned the soft ballad into a slow-burning power rock classic, stretching the emotional wreckage of the lyrics into something that sounded like it hurt to sing. The transformation was so complete that most rock fans today have no idea the Everly Brothers ever touched the song at all. It became Nazareth's highest-charting single in the United States, ironically outperforming Hair of the Dog, the song most casual fans actually associate with the band's name and image. It reached number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100, sold well over 1 million copies, and has since been covered again and again by artists ranging from country singers to metal bands, nearly all of them following Nazareth's blueprint of slow-building heartbreak rather than the Everly Brothers' gentler original. Guitarist Manny Charlton later said the band almost didn't include it on the album at all, viewing it as filler until fan reaction after early live shows convinced them otherwise. A quiet, overlooked 1960 ballad became one of the defining power ballads of the 1970s, and the band that made it famous is remembered for a song they didn't write. Number 5, Twist and Shout, most famously by the Beatles.
Just make a noise, okay? You do that?
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Okay then, the song Twist and Shout.
The song started life in 1961 under the working title Shake It Up Baby, written by Phil Medley and Burt Burns, and was first recorded by a little-known R&B group called the Top Notes, a version so poorly produced that even the songwriters reportedly hated it. The Isley Brothers cut their own version a year later, reworking the arrangement with a punchier horn section and a call and response energy, pushed it into the top 20, and gave the song its first real life on the charts. Then, in 1963, the Beatles were racing to finish their debut album, Please Please Me, in a single marathon 10-hour session, and Twist and Shout was the very last track left on the list. John Lennon's voice was already shredded raw from singing all day. According to legend, he gargled milk, sucked down cough drops, and powered through the vocal in essentially one take, because there simply wasn't time or vocal cord left for another. That raw, blown-out scream became one of the most iconic vocal performances in rock history, capturing a kind of desperate, physical energy that no polished take could have matched. The Beatles' version eclipsed every prior recording and became a defining moment of the British invasion, the song that closed out their debut album and opened American ears to what was coming. Producer George Martin reportedly knew Lennon's voice wouldn't survive a second full take, so what fans hear on the record is essentially the only usable performance ever captured, which is part of why it sounds so unrepeatable. A song born from vocal exhaustion and studio time pressure became legendary precisely because of it. Number 4, I Love Rock and Roll by Joan Jett and the Blackhearts. The original was recorded in 1975 by a little-known British band called the Arrows, and it barely registered outside the UK, quietly fading after a modest run on British television. Joan Jett happened to catch the band performing it live on that same British TV show back in 1976, while touring overseas with the Runaways, and she fell in love with the song on the spot, reportedly turning to a bandmate right there in the room and saying she was going to make it a hit someday, years before she'd have a band of her own capable of recording it properly. Years later, now fronting her own band, she finally got her chance. Released in 1981 with the Blackhearts, her cover spent 7 consecutive weeks at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became one of the single most recognizable rock anthems of the entire decade. The song's co-writer, Alan Merrill, later admitted with a laugh in an interview that Jett's version was the one that actually made him real money, calling it a strange kind of poetic justice. The Arrows' original has become little more than a footnote, remembered mainly by trivia hunters and collectors. The single sold well past 2 million copies in the United States alone, and turned Jett, who had already been rejected by more than 20 record labels before releasing it independently, into one of the defining voices of 1980s rock. Joan Jett didn't just cover the song, she became so inseparable from it that for millions of fans, there is no other version. Number 3, Proud Mary, most famously by Ike and Tina Turner. Creedence Clearwater Revival wrote and released the original in 1969, and it was already a massive hit in its own right, one of CCR's most enduring signature songs, built on John Fogerty's driving guitar riff and swampy southern imagery. But 2 years later, Ike and Tina Turner completely reinvented it from the ground up for their album Workin' Together, opening with a slow, sultry, almost whispered build, Tina's voice barely above a murmur, before exploding without warning into a full-throttle soul rock rave-up, the tempo doubling and the horns kicking in like a switch had been flipped. Vocal delivering a raw physical ferocity the original never carried. Their version won a Grammy Award for Best R&B Vocal Performance by a Duo or Group, and became one of the most electrifying live performances in rock and soul history, a showstopper that closed out concert after concert. It's a rare case on this list where the cover didn't erase the original. CCR's version remains just as beloved today, but the Turners' rendition became the one artists still try to imitate at award shows, tribute concerts, and karaoke nights decades later. The nice and easy, then nice and rough arrangement now considered its own separate piece of music history. Tina Turner would go on to perform that same slow build arrangement in nearly every live show for the rest of her career, and decades later still described it in interviews as one of the performances she was proudest of. A song about a riverboat rolling on the river became a showcase for one of the most explosive vocal performances rock and soul ever produced. Now tell me, which of these did you already know was a cover before watching this video? Drop it in the comments. We'd genuinely love to read them. Number 2, All Along the Watchtower by Jimi Hendrix.
Drink my wine. plowman, dig my earth.
Bob Dylan wrote and recorded the original in 1967 for his album John Wesley Harding, a sparse, cryptic, almost whispered folk track built around little more than a strummed acoustic guitar and his own voice, one of dozens of quietly poetic songs buried on that record. Jimi Hendrix heard it not long after the album's release, reportedly became obsessed with it almost immediately, and within a matter of weeks had booked studio time to reimagine the song completely, layering in a wailing, cascading guitar arrangement, thunderous drums courtesy of Mitch Mitchell, and a dense, echoing production style that turned a quiet three-chord folk warning into a full-blown psychedelic rock landmark, recorded, famously, before Hendrix had even properly learned all the lyrics. What makes this cover genuinely unique on this list is that Dylan himself has publicly said, more than once, that he now considers Hendrix's version the definitive one. He has performed the song live in concert more times than almost any other song in his entire catalogue, and by his own admission, he often follows Hendrix's arrangement on stage rather than his own original recording. It's one of the only instances in rock history where the original songwriter has openly conceded, in interviews and on stage, that someone else's version became the real one. Rolling Stone would later rank Hendrix's recording among the greatest songs of all time, and guitarists have spent more than 50 years since trying to replicate the layered, almost orchestral guitar work he built in just a few frantic studio sessions in early 1968. A quiet folk warning about approaching riders became, in Hendrix's hands, one of the most iconic guitar recordings ever committed to tape. Number 1. Hurt by Johnny Cash.
I hurt myself today.
Nine Inch Nails released the original in 1994 on their album The Downward Spiral, a bleak, industrial confession of addiction and self-destruction written by Trent Reznor from what he later described as an extremely intimate, one of the most emotionally raw songs of the decade. Then, in 2002, producer Rick Rubin, who had spent years reinventing Cash's late career through the stripped-down American recording series, suggested something that sounded almost absurd on paper: an aging, ailing Johnny Cash, in declining health, hospitalized during parts of the recording sessions, and not far from the end of his life, recording a stark, stripped-down piano and acoustic guitar version of an industrial rock song written by a man nearly 40 years his junior. The result, and its accompanying music video directed by Mark Romanek, showing Cash surrounded by relics of his own career inside the crumbling House of Cash Museum, watched the video for the first time in the studio with Rage Against the Machine's Zach de la Rocha sitting beside him, and by the end there was nothing but silence. He later said flatly, "That song isn't mine anymore." The video received 7 MTV Video Music Award nominations and won Best Cinematography in 2003, was named Music Video of the Year at the CMA Awards that same year, and posthumously won the Grammy for Best Short-Form